Okay, settle in, take a deep breath. Sometimes the foundations we build our lives on, the very structures we pour our hearts into, well, sometimes they're shaken by forces we never saw coming. And in those moments, we discover a strength, a quiet resilience we didn't even know we possessed. This is one of those stories. My name is Caleb Mercer, or at least that's the name at the heart of the story I want to share with you today. He's 47 years old, and for 18 years, nearly half his life, he was the quiet engine driving a company called Iron Technologies. Senior Systems Architect. That was his title. But titles, they rarely capture the soul of the work, do they? Picture this, a sleek, modern conference room, expensive mahogany table, probably gleaming under recessed lighting. On one side sits Caleb. On the other, Julian Keene, the new CEO. Young guy, maybe barely 40, impeccably dressed in a suit that probably cost more than Caleb's first car. He's only been at Iron for 3 months, brought in by the private equity firm that had swallowed the company whole the previous year. Julian speaks, his voice smooth, confident, maybe a little too loud for the room. "We're bringing in consultants," he says, the words hitting the polished surface of the table like dropped stones. "Fresh perspectives." He slides a packet of papers across the mahogany. "Termination papers. Your legacy systems," Julian continues, his tone implying something ancient, dusty, obsolete. "They're holding us back. 18 years. Just like that." Caleb didn't argue. He didn't plead or raise his voice. Imagine the stillness inside him, the calm eye of a storm that must have been raging beneath the surface. He simply nodded, reached out, and took the packet. "I understand," he said, his voice even. And then he started the surreal process of packing his desk, the contents of nearly 2 decades of his professional life, while someone from HR stood by, a silent, awkward observer. 18 years ago, Iron wasn't this polished machine run by men in custom suits talking about streamlining operations. It was 6 people. 6 people crammed into a dusty warehouse somewhere in Seattle, fueled by lukewarm coffee, late nights, and a shared dream. Caleb was one of them. He wasn't just an architect. He was the architect. He built their core software platform, the very heart that pumped lifeblood through the entire company, from lines of code typed out in the dim glow of a monitor while the city slept. He built it from nothing but sheer will, intellect, and probably an unhealthy amount of caffeine. This new CEO, Julian, he never once asked Caleb how it all worked. Never sat down to understand the intricate web Caleb had woven, the system that had carried the company through thick and thin. Julian just saw legacy. Old, slow, something to be discarded for the new and shiny. That very morning, Caleb had watched him stride into the office, flanked by 2 consultants from some trendy San Francisco firm, radiating an aura of disruptive change. Oh, Caleb knew. You don't spend 18 years building something complex without developing a keen sense of intuition. He knew where this was headed. 18 years. Think about that weight. The jobs he'd turned down, jobs that offered more money, maybe more prestige. The moments missed with his family, his son's baseball games lost to server emergencies, birthdays celebrated with a phone call from the office instead of a hug at home. Countless nights spent troubleshooting, patching, securing, while his wife Karen slept alone while the rest of the world was dark and quiet. Why? Because he believed in what they were building. It wasn't just a G. It was his creation, his contribution. They gave him 30 minutes. 30 minutes to erase 18 years from his physical workspace. He took 15. Packed the essentials, his favorite coffee mug, worn smooth from countless refills, photos of Karen and the kids, Olivia and his son, their faces smiling out from happier, less complicated times. A few personal trinkets, and one other small item, almost an afterthought, tucked away discreetly, a small, unassuming external hard drive. Nothing belonging to the company, just personal files. Walking out, box in hand, he passed Donna from accounting. She'd been there almost as long as he had, one of the originals, her eyes usually crinkled with a friendly smile, widened in shock, taking in the box, the finality of it. "Caleb," she whispered, her voice laced with disbelief. "What's happening?" He managed a quiet reply. echoing the CEO's hollow words. Time for fresh perspectives, Donna. The security guard escorted him out. Tyler, not just a uniform, but a young man Caleb knew. They shared a quiet connection. Caleb fished with Tyler's dad on weekends sometimes, escaping the digital world for the calm stillness of Lake Washington. Tyler couldn't meet his eyes. He looked down at the polished lobby floor, his voice low, apologetic. "I'm sorry about this, Mr. Mercer." Caleb just nodded gently. "Not your fault, Tyler." The drive home was shrouded in a heavy silence, broken only by the rhythmic sweep of the windshield wipers pushing away the persistent Seattle rain. No radio, no podcasts, no calls, just the gray sky, the wet streets, and the churning thoughts inside his own head. How do you process the sudden amputation of a part of your identity? Karen wasn't home yet. The house felt too quiet, too still. He placed the cardboard box on the kitchen counter, its contents suddenly looking small and insignificant. He unpacked the mug, the photos, setting them on the counter like small anchors in a suddenly uncertain world. Then he pulled out that small external hard drive. He made a pot of coffee, the familiar aroma filling the quiet kitchen, a small ritual of normalcy in a day that was anything but. He sat down at the kitchen table, not with the company laptop he'd used for years, but with his personal one. He opened it, navigated to a folder he'd created a long time ago, a digital safety deposit box tucked away in his personal files. Inside was the key: documentation. Proof, irrefutable evidence that the core algorithm, the mathematical genius that powered Iron Veil's entire multi-million-dollar platform, the very heart Julian Keene dismissed as legacy, had been written by Caleb Mercer. On his own time, using in his own equipment before he was even officially an employee. The timestamp on the code, the copyright registration, they predated his employment contract by 6 whole months. He hadn't sold it to Iron Veil. He'd offered it to them back when they were just starting out, struggling to make their mark, on a perpetual license basis. A critical distinction, a detail buried in old files, something the new fast-moving management, in their rush to modernize and streamline, clearly never bothered to investigate. Caleb took a slow sip of his coffee. The warmth spread through him, a small comfort. He looked out the window at the rain-streaked garden. He wouldn't have to make angry calls. He wouldn't have to fight or plead. He just had to wait. The system he built, the intricate, complex ecosystem he understood better than anyone on the planet, it wouldn't tolerate ignorance or careless meddling for long. The first cracks would appear within days. He was sure of it, and he wouldn't need to lift a finger. His quiet departure had already set the wheels in motion. Let's rewind a bit, understand the roots of this. It wasn't just about code. It was about relationships, about history. Caleb met Harold Voss back in 2004. It was at a programming conference down in Portland. They got to talking, bonding over shared frustrations, specifically about the clunky, inefficient inventory management systems that plagued businesses back then. Harold, a guy with a spark in his eye and an entrepreneurial spirit, had just started Iron Veil, or Iron Veil as it was perhaps called then, the name evolving over time, with his brother-in-law and a small team of 3 developers. Their initial product had potential. You could see the glimmer, but it was struggling. It couldn't handle growth. It couldn't scale. Over beers that evening, sketching ideas on napkins. You know how those moments happen, right? The creative energy flowing freely. Caleb outlined an algorithm, a novel approach, elegant and powerful, designed to solve the exact database bottleneck that was crippling Harold's fledgling company. Harold saw the brilliance in it instantly. He didn't need weeks of interviews or background checks. He hired Caleb right there, on the spot. A handshake deal built on mutual respect and a shared vision. Those first 5 years, they were a blur. 80-hour weeks weren't uncommon. They were the norm. Imagine the sacrifice. Caleb missed his daughter Olivia's first steps. He was stuck in the server room, wrestling with code, debugging crashes while his little girl was taking her first tentative explorations into the world. His marriage strained under the pressure. Karen, his wife, nearly left him. "Twice you're married to that company, Caleb," she'd said, her voice tight with exhaustion and loneliness. And honestly, He couldn't even argue. She wasn't wrong. The company consumed him. But he believed, truly believed, they were building something important, something lasting. Then in 2011, Harold suffered a major heart attack. The company, still growing, still finding its feet, teetered on the edge of panic. Who would lead? Who understood the intricate technical core? Caleb stepped up, not as CEO. He never wanted that corner office, the endless meetings, the corporate politics. That wasn't his nature. But he became the technical backbone, the steady hand on the tiller. He kept the systems running, kept the projects moving, reassured the team, while everyone else was reeling from the shock of Harold's illness. When potential investors came calling, sniffing around for opportunity, it was Caleb who walked them through the growth metrics, who demonstrated the stability and potential of the platform he'd built. When competitors tried to poach their best engineers, tempting them with higher salaries and stock options, it was Caleb, quiet, earnest Caleb, who sat down with them, reminding them of the vision, the camaraderie, the unique challenge they were tackling together, convincing the key players to stay. Harold eventually recovered, but the scare changed him. By 2019, he was tired, ready to step back, spend time with his grandkids, enjoy the fruits of his labor. He sold the company. Caleb understood. Truly he did. But he felt it then, the first hairline crack in the foundation he'd helped build. The new owners, a different breed altogether. All spreadsheets and quarterly earnings reports focused on growth projections rather than the soul of the operation. The personal touch, the shared history, started to fade. Then came the global pandemic, a time of unprecedented chaos and uncertainty. Businesses scrambled, systems buckled under the strain, but Iron Veil's platform, it held, rock solid. Their clients, hospitals managing critical supplies, logistics networks keeping essential goods moving, government agencies coordinating responses, they relied on Iron Veil completely. And who was ensuring that reliability? Caleb, working 20-hour days sometimes, fueled by adrenaline and a profound sense of responsibility, making sure nothing broke, nothing faltered. The board, they recognized his effort. They gave him a plaque, nice, probably gathered dust on a shelf. They gave him a bonus, appreciated certainly, but it didn't touch the core of his motivation. It felt transactional. Last year brought another acquisition. This time it was a private equity firm, colder, more calculating. Their first move? Installing Julian Keene as the new CEO. And the changes started almost immediately. 2 weeks after Julian arrived, he canceled the annual development retreat, a tradition Caleb valued, a time for the team to bond, brainstorm, recharge away from the daily grind. Unnecessary expense, Julian declared, despite the retreat costing less than his own hefty signing bonus. The message was clear: culture, morale, team cohesion. These were secondary to the bottom line. 3 weeks in, Julian reorganized the entire engineering department, without consulting Caleb, without tapping into his 18 years of institutional knowledge, his understanding of the team's strengths, the system's nuances. He just shuffled boxes on an org chart, bringing in some of his old buddies from Stanford as high-priced strategy consultants. Then came the meeting about a month before the end, a management meeting where Julian, in front of others, casually dismissed Caleb's approach as old school, said they needed to rethink everything from the ground up. It wasn't just dismissive, it felt like a deliberate undermining. Caleb saw the writing on the wall. The trajectory was clear. But what could he do? He kept his head down. He focused on his work. He kept the systems running, the heart of the company beating steadily, even as its new leadership seemed intent on performing unnecessary surgery. Karen saw it too, of course. She always did. She had this incredible ability to read the subtle shifts in his mood, the unspoken anxieties he carried home. "They're pushing you out, aren't they?" she asked one evening, her voice soft, concerned. He couldn't deny it, not really. Maybe, he admitted with a shrug that didn't feel casual at all. "What are you gonna do?" she pressed gently. He didn't have an answer then, just a heavy feeling in his gut. But that weekend, something shifted within him. Not anger, not yet, more like preparedness. a quiet instinct for self-preservation kicking in. He spent hours meticulously updating his personal records. He double-checked his copyright registration for the algorithm, ensuring every detail was accurate, ironclad. He made sure his personal code repositories, the ones stored on his own machines from years ago, were properly documented, time-stamped, and backed up. Not because he was planning to cause trouble. Caleb wasn't wired for sabotage. It was simpler than that. He just believed in being prepared, in having his foundations secure, even if the structure built upon them was becoming unstable. And through all this, through the changing ownership, the shifting corporate culture, the arrival of Julian, the unsettling feeling of being sidelined, Caleb kept one crucial piece of information entirely to himself: the original algorithm, the elegant mathematical core that powered every single product Ironvale sold, the very innovation that had launched the company. Its ownership had never actually been transferred. He had licensed it to them. Licensed, not sold. It's a difference that might seem small, semantic even, to someone skimming a contract. But legally, ethically, it was a chasm, a very, very big one. And Julian Keene, in his haste to bring in fresh perspectives, had just walked right up to the edge of it. So there Caleb was, 3 days after being unceremoniously ejected from the company he had poured his life into. He was out in the backyard, trying to find some solace in simple manual labor, fixing a section of the wooden fence that had been leaning precariously for weeks. The rhythmic thud of the hammer against the nails was almost therapeutic. Then his phone started buzzing, insistently. He pulled it out of his pocket, 5 missed calls, all from Ironvale's main number, 2 more from Julian Keene's direct line, and a voicemail. He listened to it, standing there in the damp Seattle air, hammer in hand. "Caleb, this is Julian." The smooth confidence was gone from his voice, replaced by a tight, urgent edge. We're having some issues with the core systems. Seems a bit unstable. We need your expertise to, smooth things out. Call me back, ASAP. Caleb didn't call back. He slipped the phone back into his pocket and went back to the fence, hammering, measuring, focusing on the tangible task at hand. An hour passed, the phone buzzed again. And again, texts started flooding in, this time from former team members, people he'd mentored, people he respected. Panic bled through their digital words. "Caleb, systems are crashing all over the place. Nobody knows what to do. The consultants tried to optimize something in the main algorithm. I think they broke it. Clients are furious. Major accounts are threatening to pull their contracts." Wow, it was happening even faster than he'd anticipated. The fresh perspectives had apparently involved tinkering with the one piece of code they absolutely should not have touched, without understanding its licensed nature, without his explicit consent as the copyright holder. He finished repairing the fence, the wood solid and straight now under his hands. He went inside, showered, and made dinner for Karen and the kids. They ate together, talked about school, about weekend plans, normal life. Later, they watched a movie, curled up on the couch. Before settling in, Caleb did one simple thing. He turned his phone off, completely off. Let the digital storm rage elsewhere. Tonight, he was home. The next morning, refreshed after a solid night's sleep, perhaps his first truly uninterrupted sleep in weeks, he turned his phone back on. Predictably, it lit up with notifications. Among them, an email from Julian Keene. Subject line, urgent, consulting opportunity. He opened it. Julian, ever the negotiator, was offering him a consulting gig, $300 an hour, to come back in, temporarily of course, and assist with transition issues. Transition issues, a remarkably bland euphemism for catastrophic system failure caused by their own incompetence. There was no apology, no acknowledgement of the abrupt firing just 3 days earlier, just a desperate, poorly disguised plea for help, framed as a lucrative opportunity. Caleb typed a brief, polite reply. "Thank you for the offer, Julian, but I must decline at this time." He hit send. By noon, the tone shifted. An email arrived not from Julian, but from Ironvale's legal department. Stern language, vague references to proprietary technology, employee obligations, potential breaches. The implied threat was clear. "You owe us, you need to fix this, or else." Caleb didn't even bother replying. He simply forwarded the entire email thread to his lawyer, Sarah Jenkins, a sharp, no-nonsense attorney he'd kept on retainer for years, precisely for situations like this. He added a simple note, FYI, seems they didn't check the original license agreement. Sarah called him back within the hour, and she was laughing, genuinely laughing. Caleb, oh my gosh, they really did it, didn't they? She chuckled. They clearly haven't read your original contracts, the ones predating your employment. The algorithm's copyright is registered solely to you, personally. You granted Ironvale a license, yes, but it specifically prohibits any modification or reverse engineering without your express written consent. They modified it. They breached the license agreement, Caleb. You are completely 100% in the clear. In fact, she added, her voice taking on a more serious edge, they're the ones in breach. Hearing those words, hearing the legal confirmation of what he already knew deep down, that's when the full weight of it truly landed. 18 years, all the sacrifices, his daughter's first steps, his son's games, the anniversaries celebrated late or not at all, the countless sleepless nights wrestling with code when the rest of the world dreamed, all poured into building something, nurturing it, protecting it, and they had discarded him, dismissed him like a piece of outdated hardware, like his 18 years of dedication meant absolutely nothing. The injustice of it settled deep in his bones, cold and hard. He walked into his small home office, the one room that had always been his sanctuary, his thinking space. He opened a drawer in his old wooden desk, rummaging beneath some papers until his fingers closed around a specific business card. He'd kept it tucked away for nearly a year. Elaine Winters, Chief Technology Officer, Meridian Systems. He remembered meeting her at a tech conference the previous spring. She wasn't like the private equity guys or the slick consultants. She was brilliant, technically sharp, and genuinely impressed with the robustness and elegance of the system Caleb had built at Ironvale. She understood the architecture, the innovation behind it. If you ever decide you want to change, Caleb, she had said, her gaze direct and sincere, handing him her card, give me a call. We value talent like yours. We'd create something special for you at Meridian. He hadn't seriously considered it back then. Loyalty, belief in the original mission. He was still invested in Ironvale despite the shifting sands. But now things were different. He wasn't bound by loyalty to a company that had shown him none. He was free. He didn't call Elaine right away, though. The impulse was there, the allure of a fresh start, of being valued. But first, he needed space. He needed clarity. He drove out to Lake Washington, parked the car, and just sat by the shore, watching the sailboats glide across the choppy gray water. The wind felt cool on his face. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, his mind wasn't churning with server loads, deployment schedules, or urgent bug fixes. It was just quiet, processing, letting the reality settle. His phone rang again. He glanced at the screen. Julian, he hesitated for a moment, then answered, holding the phone loosely to his ear, his gaze fixed on the distant mountains. Caleb, Julian's voice was strained, the desperation barely contained. We need to talk. Seriously. The situation here it's critical. Caleb didn't say anything. He just listened to the sound of the water lapping against the shore. Our clients, Julian rushed on, the big ones, they're threatening to leave, daily. The consultants, they can't figure out your system architecture. It's too complex, too integrated. We need you back, Caleb. As what? Caleb asked quietly, his voice calm, betraying none of the turmoil of the past few days. There was a pause on the other end of the line, a telling hesitation. As a senior consultant, Julian finally stammered. With appropriate compensation, of course. Very appropriate. And the outdated legacy systems? Caleb asked, the words hanging in the air between them. Another pause, longer this time. Caleb could almost picture Julian squirming in his expensive chair. We may have been hasty, Julian conceded, the admission clearly costing him in our assessment. Caleb watched a blue heron land gracefully on a nearby dock, its movements deliberate, unhurried, patient. Well, think about it, Julian, he said, his voice still level. But as he clicked off the call, He knew. He knew with absolute certainty that he wouldn't be going back. Not as a consultant, not on their terms, not to fix the mess they had created by undervaluing the very foundation they stood upon. Driving home, the quiet resolve solidified within him. It wasn't just the realization that Ironvale desperately needed him. That was obvious. The deeper, more profound realization was washing over him, clean and clear like the rain-washed air. He didn't need them. Not anymore. That dependency, that 18-year entanglement, had been severed. And in its place, something new was starting to grow. A sense of autonomy, of his own inherent value, independent of the company he had served for so long. 2 days later, Caleb finally made the call, not to Julian, but to Elaine Winters at Meridian Systems. He accepted her invitation for lunch. They met at a quiet, upscale restaurant in Bellevue, deliberately chosen to be away from the usual tech haunts in Seattle, where whispers and gossip traveled fast. "I heard about the situation at Ironvale, Elaine said gently after they had ordered, her expression conveying professional sympathy, but also perhaps a touch of knowing validation. "Their systems have been unstable, let's say, for nearly a week now." Caleb simply nodded, taking a sip of water. He didn't need to elaborate. The industry buzz was surely deafening. "Their clients are getting nervous," Elaine continued, leaning forward slightly, "especially the big healthcare networks. Reliability is everything for them." She paused, studying him across the table. "They have capable engineers over there, Caleb. I know some of them, but they don't have the architect anymore. You built something truly remarkable at Ironvale, something foundational. It shouldn't be lost or dismantled because of corporate short-sightedness." She reached into her briefcase and slid a sleek folder across the table towards him. Caleb looked at it, then back at her. Inside, nestled among professional documents, was a formal job offer: Chief Innovation Officer. The title alone spoke volumes. The proposed salary was double what he'd been making at Ironvale, significant equity in Meridian Systems, and the promise of building his own team, handpicked by him. "We want to build the next generation of what you created at Ironvale, Caleb," Elaine said, her voice firm but encouraging. "But this time, we want to do it right, with you properly valued, properly supported, from day one." It was an incredible offer, more than just a job. It was validation. It was an opportunity to take his expertise, his vision, and apply it in an environment that seemed to genuinely respect both. He felt a surge of something akin to excitement, a feeling that had been dormant for a long time. But 18 years of caution, of considering every angle, didn't just vanish overnight. "I appreciate this immensely, Elaine," he said honestly. "It's very compelling. I need to think about it. Discuss it with my wife, Karen." Elaine nodded, understanding immediately. "Of course, take all the time you need. The offer stands." When Caleb pulled into his driveway later that afternoon, feeling lighter than he had in days, the sight that greeted him instantly put him back on guard. A black sedan, expensive, anonymous, was parked at the curb directly in front of his house. Two men stood on his porch. They weren't delivery drivers or neighbors. They wore dark, impeccably tailored suits that screamed lawyer or corporate enforcer. Ironvale's legal eagles had tracked him down. "Mr. Mercer," the older of the two men said as Caleb approached his own front door. His tone was clipped, professional, but carried an undercurrent of intimidation. "We've been trying to reach you regarding an urgent company matter." "I'm not with the company anymore," Caleb stated calmly, stopping a few feet away, not inviting them inside. "This concerns intellectual property," the lawyer continued. "Undeterred, specifically, property developed during your employment at Ironvale Technologies. Standard procedure in these situations requires us to examine all personal devices, computers, hard drives, anything that might contain company data." He gestured vaguely towards the house. "We'll need to collect those items for forensic analysis." Ah, so that was their play. They weren't just trying to strong-arm him back. They were fishing, desperately searching for any shred of evidence, however flimsy, that he might have violated his employment agreement. Maybe proof he'd copied company code onto his personal drive. He hadn't. Maybe evidence he'd used company resources years ago when developing the original algorithm. He hadn't. Anything they could twist to try and invalidate his copyright claim, to muddy the waters and regain leverage. It was a classic corporate intimidation tactic. Caleb didn't flinch. He reached into his pocket, pulled out Sarah Jenkins' business card and held it out to them. "You'll need to speak with my attorney," he said firmly, his voice steady. "Her contact information is right there. I have nothing further to discuss with you directly." He watched their eyes flicker with surprise, perhaps annoyance that he wasn't immediately cowed. They took the card, exchanged a brief, unhappy glance, and after a moment of hesitation, turned and walked back to their black sedan. Caleb waited until they drove away before letting out a slow breath and unlocking his front door. This was getting serious. That evening, the phone rang again. Julian. His voice was different this time. The desperation was still there, but overlaid with a thin veneer of forced reason, tinged with frustration. "Your lawyer is being difficult, Caleb," he said, dispensing with pleasantries. "Look, this could get messy, really messy. Legal battles, public statements. It's not good for anyone. Not for the company, not for you." The implied threat of dragging his name through the mud hung heavy in the air. "What do you want, Julian?" Caleb asked tiredly. "Come back," Julian said, the words rushing out now. "Just come back. 6 months. We'll pay you your full previous salary. Help the transition team, the new transition team, understand the systems. Get things stable. Then we part ways amicably. Clean break. The company retains all rights to the technology, of course, as standard work for hire, and you walk away clean." There it was, the crux of it. They still didn't get it, or maybe they were pretending not to. "Julian," Caleb said, his voice low but clear, cutting through the CEO's bluster. "The core algorithm was never Iron Veil's property to retain. I told you. I licensed it to the company. That license agreement was signed in 2004, before I was even officially on the payroll." Silence on the other end, a heavy, static-filled silence. Then disbelief bordering on indignation. That's absurd, Caleb. Everything you developed while associated with the company is work for hire. Standard practice. Check the original licensing agreement from 2004, Julian," Caleb repeated patiently. "Signed by me, signed by Harold Voss. It's still binding. It predates my employment contract. That documentation, it doesn't exist," Julian sputtered, sounding less certain now. "We've been through everything in the archives, the legal files." "Oh, it exists," Caleb said quietly. "Harold kept a copy in his personal files. I kept my copy, obviously, and just in case anyone tries to make those copies disappear, the United States Copyright Office has a registered copy on file as well, dating back to 2004. Checkmate." More silence. This time, Caleb could almost hear the gears grinding in Julian's head, the dawning, horrified realization. We'll need to verify that claim," he finally managed, his voice tight, strained. "Take your time, Julian," Caleb said softly, a touch of weariness in his voice. "Take all the time you need." He ended the call. The very next day, news trickled back to Caleb through his network of former colleagues. Iron Veil management, likely on Julian's panicked orders or perhaps the consultant's misguided advice, had locked out all access for his former core team members. The very people who might, even accidentally, stumble upon the truth or possess the deep system knowledge needed for a real fix. Instead, the expensive consultants from San Francisco were given free rein, apparently attempting a desperate, full system rebuild or modification, likely trying to excise Caleb's algorithm entirely and replace it with something else, something they thought they could control. It was a spectacularly bad idea. By that evening, the inevitable happened. 3 major client servers, clients in critical sectors like healthcare and logistics, crashed completely. Not just unstable, dark, offline. The heart monitor had flatlined. Karen found Caleb later that evening out in the garage. He wasn't fixing anything this time. He was just organizing, methodically sorting through boxes of old tools, things he hadn't touched in years, wiping them down, putting them in their proper place. A quiet, grounding activity. She stood in the doorway for a moment watching him. "They're imploding, aren't they?" she asked softly, already knowing the answer. He stopped what he was doing, looked up, and nodded slowly. The bare bulb overhead cast long shadows across his face. Does that make you happy? Karen asked, her voice gentle, searching his eyes. He put down the heavy wrench he was holding, the metal clinking softly against the workbench. He thought about the years, the people, the work. No, he said honestly, shaking his head. No, it doesn't make me happy. Good people still work there, Karen. People I mentored, people who poured their own sweat and late nights into that place. They don't deserve this disruption, this chaos. Karen walked over, placed a comforting hand on his arm. Neither did you, Caleb, she said softly, her touch anchoring him. Neither did you. The following morning, the dam finally broke publicly. News outlets started reporting on critical system failures at Ironvale Technologies. The market reacted swiftly and brutally. Ironvale's stock, already weakened by the acquisition turmoil, plummeted. It dropped a staggering 20% by mid-morning. Caleb's phone, which he'd turned back on, started lighting up again. Texts from former team members, bewildered, maybe even a little suspicious. Caleb, what did you do? Did you sabotage something before you left? Be honest. The accusations stung, even though he knew they came from a place of confusion and fear. He responded to each one patiently, consistently, truthfully. I didn't do anything. They attempted to modify a licensed component without authorization. That's what caused the failure. He owed them the truth, even if management wouldn't give it to them. By the afternoon, Julian Keene's strategy shifted dramatically. The threats vanished. The legal posturing evaporated. Now it was pure bargaining. Desperate pleading, disguised as generous offers. A substantial consulting contract far exceeding the initial $300 an hour. Talk of a public apology from the board. Anything to get Caleb back in the door. To stop the bleeding. Caleb didn't respond to any of it. The time for negotiation on those terms had passed. And then, the final domino fell. Late that evening, Caleb received another text, this one from a trusted source still inside Ironvale. One of the consultants, likely digging through old archives in a desperate search for anything that could help, had finally unearthed it. The original licensing agreement from 2004, tucked away in Harold Voss's archived executive files, just as Caleb had said. Within an hour of that discovery, Sarah Jenkins, Caleb's lawyer, received a call. Not from Julian, not from the aggressive lawyers who had shown up at Caleb's house. This call came directly from Ironvale's general counsel. And the tone? Completely different. Respectful, conciliatory, almost deferential. The trap they thought they were setting for Caleb, the leverage they assumed they had, the intellectual property they believed they owned outright, it had all collapsed, and the jaws of their own making were closing in around them. The power dynamic had irrevocably, seismically shifted. A week. It had been exactly 1 week since Caleb had walked out of the Ironvale offices with his box of belongings. A week that felt like a lifetime. He arranged to meet Harold Voss for lunch. Harold, the man who had started it all, now retired for 3 years but still emotionally connected to the company he'd built from scratch. He still kept tabs, heard the whispers, understood the undercurrents. They met at Harold's favorite spot, a classic, unassuming diner in Tacoma, far from the gleaming towers and prying eyes of Seattle's tech corridor. Over steaming cups of coffee and plates of comfort food, Harold shook his head, a wry, almost sad smile playing on his lips. They really stepped in it this time, Caleb, he said, stirring his coffee slowly. Julian and those consultants, trying to rebuild your algorithm from scratch? Without understanding the license? Without you? Idiots. The word wasn't spoken with anger, more with a weary resignation. Did you know this could happen, Harold? Caleb asked quietly, looking at his old mentor, the man who had first believed in his code scribbled on a napkin. Did you suspect they'd be this reckless? Harold sighed, leaning back in the vinyl booth. I knew they didn't truly understand what they bought, Caleb. These private equity types, they rarely do. They see balance sheets, profit margins, assets to be leveraged or stripped. They don't see the architecture, the history, the intricate dependencies. They don't understand that some things can just be swapped out like faulty components. He paused, taking another sip of coffee. Then he reached down beside the booth and pulled up a worn leather briefcase. He clicked it open and took out an old, slightly yellowed folder. He slid it across the Formica tabletop towards Caleb. "Remember this?" Caleb opened the folder. Inside wasn't the standard company employment contract. It was something else. Something much older, much more significant. It was their original partnership agreement, drafted and signed back in 2004, just between Harold Voss and Caleb Mercer, personally, before Ironvale was even properly incorporated in its final form. And there, spelled out in clear, unambiguous language, was the clause they had agreed upon all those years ago. The core algorithm, the intellectual property Caleb brought to the table, would remain his personal property. Ironvale would receive an exclusive, perpetual license to use it, but that license was explicitly contingent on Caleb's continued employment, or a mutually agreed upon separation agreement. It wasn't work for hire, it was a foundational agreement between partners. "You protected me," Caleb said, the realization dawning, the depth of Harold's foresight hitting him. "Even back then, you built in this protection." Harold nodded, a faint smile touching his eyes. "You were taking a big risk, Caleb, joining a tiny, unknown startup, basically betting your talent on my dream. I wanted to make sure that if things ever went sideways, if the company failed, or if future owners didn't appreciate your contribution, that your creation, the heart of it all, remained yours. Fair is fair. Did you tell the new owners? The private equity firm? Did you mention this agreement during the sale?" Caleb asked, trying to piece it all together. Harold grimaced slightly. "I tried," he admitted, mentioned it during the due diligence process, pointed out the unique nature of the core IP licensing. But honestly, they weren't interested. Their lawyers skimmed it, probably dismissed it as old history. They were laser-focused on the client list, the revenue streams, the tangible assets they could put a number on. He made air quote gestures with his fingers. Technical details from the past, historical agreements, they just waved it away. They just wanted the assets and the lucrative client contracts. And suddenly, the full, chilling picture snapped into focus for Caleb. Julian Keene's arrival, the push to sideline him, the old-school comments, the abrupt firing, it wasn't just arrogance or incompetence, though there was plenty of that. It was calculated. The private equity firm wasn't planning to grow Ironvale. They were planning to strip it, sell off the profitable divisions, the client relationships, the technology, piece by piece, maximizing their return in the shortest possible time. And Caleb, he was the biggest obstacle. He was the only one who truly understood how all the pieces fit together, the only one with the deep knowledge to potentially block or complicate their asset-stripping strategy. His termination wasn't about bringing in fresh perspectives. It was about clearing the path for dismantling the company he had spent 18 years building. The betrayal felt even deeper now, colder, more deliberate. "There's more," Harold said quietly, leaning forward again, his voice dropping lower. Something else they didn't pay close enough attention to in the fine print. He paused, letting the weight of his next words sink in. "Before I finalized the sale, when I was negotiating my exit, I managed to slip a clause into the final agreement. A contingency." Caleb waited, intrigued. "It states," Harold continued, a spark flickering in his eyes, "that if the core technology platform, your algorithm essentially, becomes non-functional, demonstrably unstable, and impacting major clients for more than 10 consecutive days, I, Harold Voss, retain the right to buy back the entire company." Caleb stared at him, astonished. "A buyback clause? Why on earth would a private equity firm agree to that?" Harold chuckled softly. "Couple of reasons. One, they were arrogant, too focused on the upside, didn't seriously consider the downside risk of the core tech failing. Their lawyers probably glossed over it, thinking it was a standard key man type clause that was unlikely ever to be triggered. Two, he added with a sly grin, I framed it as a way to protect their investment. Told them, look, if something catastrophic happens to the tech after I'm gone, this gives you a safety net, ensures continuity, prevents total collapse. They bought it, saw it as risk mitigation for them. So you can buy the company back, Caleb asked, his mind reeling with the implications. 10 consecutive days of failure. They were already on day 7 or 8. Harold held his gaze steadily across the table. "Not just me, Caleb," he corrected gently. "We can buy it back. I've got some money set aside, the nest egg from the original sale, and I've already spoken quietly to a few of the original investors, the ones who believed in us back in the warehouse days. They're interested, horrified by what's happening. But even with their support, we wouldn't have enough on our own. We'd need a strong partner. And more importantly," he paused, his gaze unwavering, "we'd need you. Not just your algorithm, Caleb, your leadership, your vision to rebuild it." The pieces on the chessboard weren't just shifting anymore. They were being swept aside for an entirely new game. This wasn't just about getting his job back, or even about teaching Julian Keene a lesson. This was bigger. It wasn't about revenge, not in the petty sense. It felt more like correction, like restoring something that had been broken, not just technically, but ethically. A chance to reclaim the soul of Iron Veil. That evening back home, Caleb received an email. It came from an anonymous, encrypted account. No sender name, no identifying information. But the contents? Explosive. Attached were internal documents, email chains, planning memos. Clear evidence that Julian Keene and the Stanford consultants weren't just incompetent. They were actively plotting to sell off Iron Veil's lucrative healthcare division to a direct competitor. A move that would not only gut the company, but would almost certainly violate stringent client confidentiality agreements, potentially exposing sensitive patient data in the process. Someone inside, one of his loyal former team members, was risking their own position to feed him critical information. They knew Caleb was the only one who could potentially stop the bleeding, perhaps even right the ship. Caleb didn't hesitate. He forwarded the entire package to Sarah Jenkins, his lawyer, with a simple note: "More fuel for the fire. This looks potentially illegal, not just unethical." The very next day, the consequences of the ongoing system failure intensified. 3 of Iron Veil's largest, most prestigious clients, major players in logistics and finance, publicly announced they were suspending their contracts indefinitely, citing ongoing reliability concerns and lack of adequate support. Their combined business represented nearly 40% of Iron Veil's total annual revenue. 40%. Gone. Just like that. The company wasn't just bleeding, it was hemorrhaging. By the weekend, the inevitable happened. The Iron Veil Board of Directors convened an emergency meeting. The private equity owners, finally waking up to the disaster unfolding, were furious. Julian Keene, the Golden Boy CEO brought in to maximize profits, was summarily placed on administrative leave, the corporate equivalent of being sent to Siberia while they figured out who to blame and how to salvage the wreckage. Day 9. 9 consecutive days of critical system failures. 9 days of escalating chaos, client defections, and plummeting value. That morning, Caleb received a call. Not from Julian this time. It was Iron Veil's general counsel, the same person who had contacted Sarah Jenkins with a newfound respect just days earlier. The tone was now bordering on desperate. They made a formal settlement offer, a substantial sum, 7 figures, in exchange for Caleb immediately reinstating the license for his algorithm and perhaps signing an NDA to make the whole embarrassing episode go away quietly. Caleb listened politely to the offer. He thanked the general counsel for the call, and then he said simply, "I'll need to discuss this with my attorney and Mr. Voss. We'll be in touch." He didn't accept. He didn't reject. He just waited. The 10th day was tomorrow. Midnight tomorrow marked the deadline for Harold's buyback clause. That night, Caleb and Karen sat out on their back deck. The rain had stopped, and a sliver of moon peeked through the clouds. The air was cool and clean. He told her everything about Harold's foresight, the original partnership agreement, the hidden buyback clause, about the anonymous emails, the evidence of Julian's planned dismantling of the company, about the settlement offer he hadn't accepted. "Harold wants to buy the company back," Caleb said, watching the shadows lengthen across the lawn. "With you?" Karen asked, her voice quiet. "With me," he confirmed, "as CTO, as a partner, to rebuild it." She took his hand, her fingers lacing through his. He could feel the gentle pressure, the unspoken support. "Do you want that, Caleb?" she asked softly. "After everything they put you through, do you really want to go back into that world?" He thought about it, truly thought about it. The 18 years, the code he loved, the problems he solved, the late nights, yes, but also the camaraderie of the early days, the pride in building something from nothing. He thought about the people still there, caught in the crossfire. He thought about Julian and the private equity firm, their callous disregard for legacy, for loyalty, for the human cost of their business decisions. He thought about Elaine Winter's offer at Meridian, safe, lucrative, respectful. And he thought about this unexpected chance to reclaim Ironvale, not as it was, but as it could be. "I'm not sure yet," he answered honestly, meeting Karen's gaze in the dim light. "It feels complicated." But tomorrow, he added, a strange sense of calm settling over him. Tomorrow is day 10, the deadline, the moment of decision. Day 10 dawned crisp and clear, a rarity for Seattle. But inside Ironvale Technologies, the atmosphere was anything but. The core systems remained offline or critically unstable. Financial analysts were openly predicting bankruptcy if the situation wasn't resolved within hours. Rumors flew through the depleted ranks of remaining employees. Whispers of mass layoffs, of the company being broken up and sold for scrap. The office, Caleb heard, was half empty. Some had been let go in the chaos, others had simply resigned, unable to stomach the uncertainty and mismanagement any longer. Caleb wasn't at home waiting. He was downtown in a private, discreet office suite rented for the day. With him were Harold Voss, looking determined and energized, and Sarah Jenkins, his lawyer, sharp and focused, stacks of documents neatly organized before her. On a large screen at the end of the conference table, Elaine Winters, the CTO of Meridian Systems, joined them via secure video call. The alliance was assembled. The clock was ticking. "The board is desperate, Caleb," Sarah began, summarizing the situation. "Their lawyers contacted me again this morning. They've upped the settlement offer significantly, $3 million, cash, for a permanent, irrevocable license transfer of the algorithm IP. They just want this nightmare to end." $3 million, Harold scoffed quietly. "A fraction of what that algorithm is worth, and they know it." "And if we wait?" Caleb asked, looking at Harold, then at Sarah. "If we let the clock run out." "Harold's buyback clause officially activates at midnight tonight," Sarah confirmed. "As per the sale agreement he signed, the predetermined buyback price for the entire company, assets, liabilities, everything, is $8 million. $8 million. A steep discount from its value just months ago, but still a significant sum." Harold leaned forward, his eyes intense. "As I told you, Caleb, I've secured firm commitments for $4 million, from my own funds and from our original loyal investors. They believe in this. They want to see Ironvale restored, but that leaves a gap. The other $4 million would have to come from a new equity partner." All eyes in the room, Caleb's, Harold's, Sarah's, turned towards the screen, towards Elaine Winters. Elaine didn't hesitate. Her voice came through the speakers, clear and decisive. "Meridian Systems is prepared to partner in this venture. We will provide the remaining $4 million in capital." She paused, letting the commitment land. This investment would be for a 40% equity stake in the newly restructured Ironvale. "Our participation, however, is contingent on one key condition: Caleb Mercer joining the new entity as Chief Technology Officer, with an appropriate personal equity stake reflecting his foundational role." Caleb felt a jolt of surprise. He hadn't expected this twist. "Elaine, I thought you wanted me to join Meridian directly." A small smile played on Elaine's lips. "This is better, Caleb," she replied smoothly. "Think about it. This way you get to rebuild something that has deep personal meaning for you, something you created. You'll have the right team, the right resources, and crucially, the right partners who value your contribution. Harold brings the legacy and the heart, Meridian brings capital and strategic reach, and you bring the technical vision and the soul. Plus," she added pragmatically, "our companies, Meridian and the new Ironvale, could explore powerful joint ventures down the line, synergies that benefit everyone." His mind raced, processing the possibilities. Taking back Ironvale, Not just fixing the code, but fixing the company. Saving the jobs of the good people still trapped inside. Protecting the client relationships that had been built over decades of trust. Continuing the work he genuinely believed in, but this time on his own terms, with partners he respected. It felt right. More right than simply walking away. More right than taking the easier path at Meridian. "There's one more thing," Caleb said, looking first at Harold, then at Elaine. His voice was firm. "The current employees, the ones who stayed, the ones who tried to keep things running despite the chaos, the ones who even risked sending me information. Many of them have been loyal to the company, to the idea of Ironvale for years. They deserve protection in this transition. They deserve to be part of the future we build." "Agreed," Harold said instantly, nodding emphatically. 100%. If we do this, our first priority after stabilizing the systems is stabilizing the team. No layoffs for at least 6 months, maybe longer. And, he added, glancing at Elaine for concurrence, we implement a meaningful employee stock ownership program. Give everyone a real stake in the success they help create. Elaine nodded from the screen. Meridian fully supports that. People are the most valuable asset. We invest in talent. Caleb looked at Harold, then at Elaine's image on the screen. He took a deep breath. The path forward was clear now, challenging but clear. He nodded slowly. "Okay," he said, the word carrying the weight of decision. "Then I'm in. Let's do this." The rest of the day was a whirlwind of focused activity. Sarah Jenkins and her team drafted the necessary legal documents with lightning speed, not a settlement agreement, but the formal notice exercising Harold's buyback option. They prepared the framework for the new company structure, incorporating Meridian's investment in the commitment to employee protection. Harold worked the phones, contacting key members of the Ironvale board, individuals he knew from his time, explaining the situation calmly but firmly, outlining their plan, emphasizing this was the only viable path forward to salvage any value. Elaine, back at Meridian, finalized the financial commitments in partnership terms, ensuring everything was legally sound and ready to execute. At precisely 5 o'clock in the afternoon, Sarah Jenkins electronically submitted the formal, legally binding notice to the Ironvale board and their council. Harold Voss was officially exercising his contractual right to repurchase Ironvale Technologies, effective at midnight, for the predetermined price of $8 million. The reaction was immediate. At 6 o'clock, Caleb's personal cell phone rang. It was Julian Keene, not the CEO anymore, technically on leave but clearly still scrambling, desperate, panic-laced every word. Caleb, listen to me. Whatever they're offering you, Voss, Meridian, whoever, well, double it, triple it. Just name your price. Just fix the systems today. Before midnight, we can make this buyback thing go away." "It's not about the money, Julian," Caleb said calmly, the sense of quiet power solidifying within him. "Then what?" Julian pleaded, his voice cracking. "What is it you want? A public apology? Your old job back? With more power? A golden parachute? Just name it, Caleb. It's about building something that lasts, Julian," Caleb replied, his voice even. "Something that matters. Something based on respect, not just transactions." "This is business, Caleb," Julian almost shouted. "This isn't some idealistic crusade." Caleb didn't need to hear anymore. He quietly ended the call. By 8 o'clock that evening, the news came through official channels. Julian Keene had been formally terminated by the Ironvale Board of Directors. His brief, disastrous reign was over. Shortly after, Caleb received another call, this time from the chairman of the board himself. The tone was somber, defeated. "Mr. Mercer," Caleb, the chairman began, his voice heavy with exhaustion, We acknowledge that mistakes were made. Serious mistakes by the previous management, by the board in overseeing them. But we believe we can still make this right. There has to be a way forward besides this." "You're right, Mr. Chairman," Caleb agreed quietly. "There is a way to make this right." He paused, letting the agreement hang in the air for a beat. "By honoring the contract Mr. Voss signed in good faith. By honoring his legal right to exercise the buyback clause. and by working with us to facilitate an orderly, professional transition for the sake of the employees and the clients. There was a long silence on the other end. The chairman knew they were cornered. The legal documents were ironclad. The systems were still down. Their value was evaporating by the hour. Continuing to fight would only lead to protracted legal battles, further public embarrassment, and likely bankruptcy. At 11:30 p.m., just 30 minutes before the midnight deadline, the white flag went up. The Iron Veil board, under intense pressure from the private equity owners who just wanted to cut their losses, formally voted to accept Harold Voss's buyback offer. Meridian's partnership was approved as part of the restructuring plan. The final paperwork was electronically signed, sealed, and delivered moments before the clock struck 12. It was done. At midnight, Caleb Mercer sat alone at his kitchen table. The house was quiet. Karen and the kids were asleep. The whirlwind of the day had passed, leaving behind a strange sense of calm exhaustion and profound responsibility. He opened his personal laptop, the same one he'd used to check his copyright registration just 10 days earlier. He composed a simple email addressed to the distribution list of all remaining Iron Veil employees. Subject: important update. The message was brief, direct, and reassuring. Team, effective immediately, Iron Veil Technologies is under new ownership, led by Harold Voss and myself, in partnership with Meridian Systems. The issues with the core algorithm will be addressed, and system stability will be reinstated starting tomorrow morning. Most importantly, no jobs will be lost as part of this transition. Your dedication is valued and needed. I know you have many questions. Harold and I will address them all at an all-hands meeting tomorrow afternoon. Further details to follow. Welcome to the next chapter. Caleb Mercer. Karen padded softly into the kitchen, drawn by the glow of the laptop screen. She came up behind him, resting her hands gently on his shoulders as he reread the message one last time before hitting send. "So," she said softly, her voice warm in the quiet room, "you're really going back." Caleb closed the laptop, the soft click echoing in the stillness. He turned slightly, meeting her gaze. "Not back, Karen," he said, a faint smile touching his lips. "Forward. It's a different company now, or at least it will be. Different ownership, different values, different terms. You know this means you'll probably be busier than ever, at least for a while," she said, her smile tinged with loving skepticism, but her eyes full of support. "Yeah," he admitted, reaching up to cover her hand with his. "For a while, definitely. Rebuilding takes work, but this time," he added, his voice firm with conviction, "this time I won't miss the important stuff. We build it right, in every way." The next morning, Caleb drove to the Iron Veil offices. It felt surreal pulling into the familiar parking lot, walking towards the same building he'd been escorted out of just 10 days prior. As he walked through the lobby, heads turned, people stopped mid-conversation. He saw a mixture of expressions on the faces of his former colleagues: confusion, disbelief, cautious hope, overwhelming relief. The grapevine had clearly been working overtime since his midnight email. Donna, the accountant from the early days, saw him heading towards the elevators. She rushed over, her eyes brimming with tears, and threw her arms around him in a tight hug. "Caleb, oh my gosh, Caleb, what happened? How?" she whispered urgently, pulling back slightly. He smiled gently, patting her arm. "It's a long story, Donna," he said quietly. "A really long story. But the short version? Sometimes you have to let something break completely before you can fix it properly. And sometimes," he added, his gaze sweeping across the lobby, "you have to reclaim what was yours all along." The all-hands meeting was scheduled for the afternoon in the main conference room, the same room where Julian Keene had delivered his termination notice. This time the room was packed, standing room only. The air crackled not with fear but with anticipation, with cautious optimism. Harold Voss stood at the front, looking older, yes, but also revitalized, a familiar warmth radiating from him. Elaine Winters joined via the large video screen, her presence conveying the strength and stability of the Meridian partnership. Caleb took his place beside Harold, facing the sea of familiar and hopeful faces. He felt the weight of the moment, the responsibility of the task ahead. Rebuilding the systems was the easy part, relatively speaking. Rebuilding trust, rebuilding morale, reshaping the culture back towards innovation, collaboration, and respect. That was the real work. This wasn't about revenge against Julian or the private equity firm. They were footnotes now, casualties of their own arrogance. This was about restoration, about taking the broken pieces and building something stronger, better, more resilient than before. The next chapter of Iron Veil was about to begin. Fast forward 6 months. 6 months of intense work, long hours, but fueled by a different kind of energy, an energy of purpose, of shared ownership, of rebuilding something meaningful. The venue wasn't the tense office conference room, but the spacious Seattle Convention Center. Iron Veil was hosting a major product launch event. The room buzzed with excitement, packed with clients, existing ones who had weathered the storm, returning ones who had suspended contracts, and potential new ones drawn by the buzz. Industry analysts, tech journalists, local media, they were all there. Harold Voss kicked things off, speaking warmly about the company's origins, its resilience, and its renewed vision for the future. Elaine Winters followed, reinforcing the strength of the Meridian partnership and their shared commitment to innovation and client success. Then it was Caleb's turn. He stepped up to the podium, calm and centered. As he adjusted the microphone, his eyes scanned the large audience. And then he saw him, sitting towards the back, trying to blend in but unmistakable in his expensive suit, Julian Keene. He'd landed a position at a competitor, predictably, and he was clearly here on a reconnaissance mission, likely expecting to see a company still wounded, limping, struggling to recover. Caleb met his gaze for a fleeting second, offered no flicker of recognition, and turned his attention back to the room, to the future. "Good afternoon," Caleb began, his voice clear and steady, filling the large hall. "Today, we're not just launching a product, we're unveiling a promise renewed." The screens behind him lit up, not with dense code, but with a sleek, elegant interface. "Introducing IntegraSphere," he announced, a completely reimagined system architecture. It builds upon the proven, reliable core that Iron Veil has always been known for, a subtle nod to the algorithm that started it all, but integrates cutting-edge capabilities, enhanced security, and an intuitive user experience designed for the challenges of tomorrow. He walked the audience through the key features, the innovations. But then, he shifted focus. "What truly makes this system unique, however, isn't just the technology," he continued, his voice resonating with sincerity. "It's the people behind it, our incredible team." He gestured towards the front rows where his core development team sat, veterans and newer faces side by side, beaming with pride. Many of the engineers, architects, and support staff who built IntegraSphere have been with Iron Veil for over a decade, some since the very beginning. They poured their expertise, their passion, and countless hours into making this happen. He paused, letting that sink in. "And because we believe that commitment deserves tangible recognition," he announced, "we have fundamentally restructured our company. Iron Veil is now implementing a significant employee stock ownership program. Our team doesn't just work for Iron Veil. They own a piece of it. Their success is our success." A wave of genuine applause rippled through the audience. Caleb glanced towards the back. Julian Keene shifted uncomfortably in his seat. This wasn't the narrative he expected. "Furthermore," Caleb continued, "we believe that innovation thrives in an open ecosystem. That's why we've established the Iron Veil Foundation. This nonprofit initiative will be dedicated to open sourcing select components of our technology, making powerful tools accessible for use in education, nonprofit research, and public service projects." More applause, louder this time. This was a company giving back, not just taking. And finally, Caleb said, his voice softening slightly, but carrying immense weight, "We understand that trust, once broken, must be earned back through action, not just words. To every single client who experienced disruptions during the system failures last year," he paused, making eye contact with several client representatives in the front rows, "we offer not just our profound apologies, but our concrete commitment. Effective immediately, every affected client will receive 2 full years of service on the new IntegraSphere platform, completely free of charge. That includes full migration support and premium technical assistance to ensure a seamless transition. The room erupted, not just polite applause, but genuine, enthusiastic cheering. Gasps of surprise rippled through the analysts and media sections. It was an incredibly bold move, a significant financial commitment, but Caleb, Harold, and Elaine had been unanimous. Rebuilding trust, demonstrating their long-term commitment to their clients, was paramount. It was an investment far more valuable than the short-term cost. As the presentation concluded and the floor opened for a Q&A session, Caleb saw Julian Keene slip quietly out the back door, his face grim. He had come expecting to witness the aftermath of a disaster, perhaps gather intelligence on a weakened competitor ripe for poaching clients. Instead, he had witnessed a resurrection, a company not just recovered, but transformed, stronger, more unified, and more ethically grounded than before. Later that day, Caleb heard through the industry grapevine that Julian's new employer, the competitor, had seen its stock price dip by 8% by the closing bell. Sometimes the most effective response isn't about striking back directly. Sometimes it's simply about rising higher, building better, and letting your success, built on integrity, speak for itself. 1 year later, a perfect, clear Saturday morning on Lake Washington. Caleb wasn't thinking about code or clients or stock prices. He had his fishing rod, a small cooler with sandwiches and drinks, and no laptop or constantly buzzing phone in sight. He walked down the dock where Harold Voss was waiting in his sturdy, comfortable fishing boat, a familiar worn baseball cap shielding his silver hair from the sun. "Right on time, Captain," Harold grinned as Caleb carefully climbed aboard, finding his balance on the gently rocking boat. They motored out to one of Harold's favorite quiet coves, the gentle hum of the outboard motor, the only sound breaking the morning stillness. They cut the engine, dropped anchor, and cast their lines into the calm, glassy water. For a long while, they just sat in comfortable silence, a silence built on years of shared history, understanding, and mutual respect. The kind of silence friends don't need to fill. Board approved the next phase of the employee ownership expansion yesterday, Harold mentioned casually after a while, his eyes on his line. Another 5% allocated across the team. "Good," Caleb replied quietly, watching the tip of his own rod. "That's good. They've earned it, every single one of them. They didn't catch anything for the first hour or so. It didn't really matter. They talked easily about their families. Karen was happy. Olivia was thriving in college. Harold's grandkids were growing up too fast. They talked about the Mariners' chances this season, about a new hiking trail Caleb had discovered. Anything and everything except the day-to-day pressures of running Iron Vale. They had learned, slowly but surely, to carve out these spaces, these moments of disconnection. Eventually, though, Harold turned to him, his expression thoughtful. "Do you ever think about it, Wellib?" he asked quietly. "You know, how it all played out, the firing, the crash, the buyback, everything?" Caleb considered the question, gazing out at the sun-dappled water. The past 18 months had been, without a doubt, the most intensely challenging, and yet, paradoxically, the most profoundly rewarding period of his entire career. Leading the technical resurrection, yes, but also helping Harold and Elaine reshape the company culture, fostering transparency, empowering the team, finding that elusive, fragile balance between the demands of the business and the needs of his family, his own well-being. "I think about the algorithm sometimes," he admitted after a moment. "How strange it is that this thing I created, pretty much alone in my tiny apartment all those years ago, fueled by instant ramen and ambition, how it became the foundation for so much, for livelihoods, for critical services, for a whole company." He paused, reeling his line in slightly. "And yeah, I think about how close we came to losing it all. Not just the company, but the integrity of what it stood for." "Any regrets?" Harold asked gently. Caleb shook his head slowly, decisively. "No, not anymore. For years, maybe I regretted staying too long sometimes. I could have left for more money, less stress. I could have tried starting my own company years ago. But I stayed because I genuinely believed in what we were building together, Harold. Back then, and even through the tough times," he looked at his friend. "And now I understand the difference more clearly. The difference between loyalty and obligation, the difference between building something precious and truly belonging to it, sharing ownership in a real way. Just then, his line went taut, a sudden, strong pull. Whoa! He stood up carefully in the boat, his fisherman's instincts kicking in, the rod bending sharply. He played the fish expertly, letting it run, then reeling it in steadily, feeling the satisfying weight, the connection. After a few minutes of skillful maneuvering, he landed a beautiful, healthy-looking bass, its scales shimmering in the morning light. Harold chuckled, reaching for the net. See, still got the touch, Caleb, in more ways than one. Later, as they motored slowly back towards the shore, the familiar skyline of Seattle coming into view, Caleb noticed the Iron Veil building in the distance. Its logo, updated but recognizable, caught the sunlight. It wasn't the same company he'd poured 18 years into before the fall. It was different now, better, stronger in the ways that truly mattered. Still learning, still evolving, still facing challenges, of course, but it felt whole again. And it felt like it belonged not just to him or to Harold or to Elaine and Meridian. It belonged to everyone inside those walls who showed up every day, contributing their piece, sharing in the risks and the rewards. Some things, Caleb realized, watching the building recede slightly as they neared the dock. Some things you simply can't own alone. And maybe, just maybe, some things you shouldn't even try to. The real value wasn't just in the creation, but in the shared journey, the collective strength, the community built around it. And that felt like the most satisfying restoration of all. And so Caleb's story reminds us, doesn't it, that true strength often isn't loud or aggressive. Sometimes it's found in quiet preparation, in unwavering principle, in the courage to reclaim what's rightfully yours, not just for yourself, but for the community you helped build. It's a reminder that betrayal doesn't have to be the end of the story. Sometimes it's the catalyst for building something even more resilient, more authentic, and ultimately, more fulfilling. Justice isn't always about punishment. Sometimes it's about restoration and rising above. If this story resonated with you, if it touched on something you've experienced or felt, please know you aren't alone on this path. Feel free to share your thoughts, your own reflections, down in the comments below. Hearing your voices is part of what makes this community so special. And if you want to continue walking with us through more stories like Caleb's, stories of quiet strength, unexpected turns, and the power of the human spirit to endure and rebuild, please consider subscribing to the channel. We journey together here. Finally, if you feel moved to support our mission of sharing these powerful narratives, you can contribute through the Super Thanks button right below the video. Every bit of support helps us keep bringing these stories to light. Remember, giving, in ways big or small, can also be a part of our own healing and finding blessing in the journey. Thank you for listening. Until next time, take care.